delighted to welcome Emily Meyer to our setting here. I have worked with Emily on as a board member for a number of years and look forward to learning more about this tool myself. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you. It is good to be here, and I'm going to jump right in to share my screen. My name is Emily Meyer. As Deb has already said, I am an ordained pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, but I serve as the executive director of Ecumenical Hub, we call it. It's the PCUSA and the UCC of Minnesota are my supporting judicatories. I also work in and through United Theological Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. As part of that job, I was introduced to an organization called the Innovation Lab. And Innovation Lab has created this wonderful tool called the Innovation Culture Index, or the ICI. And I am now a facilitator of this, and I'm here to introduce it. And so we'll take about 40 minutes of presentation time. We'll have about 10 minutes for all of you to engage with each other, a little one-on-one discussion time towards the 30-minute point. And then we'll have about 10 minutes time for questions at the end. So please feel free to jot those questions down as we go, and we'll get to them at the end. The ICI, Deb talked about it as measuring energy. It really talks about the culture of a congregation and how your congregational culture impedes or supports creativity and change. And so we're going to jump right into how it does that and what it does. But really quick, an introduction to the Innovation Lab. It is an organization started in 2017. It kind of came out of the Center for Youth Ministry Training, which has Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary as its theological partner, and I think its umbrella school. And since 2017, Innovation Lab has been working with churches and ministries across the country, across denominations, in all different geographies, working on innovation in congregations. Primarily, it began primarily in youth ministry, but now has expanded to all areas of ministry. So this Innovation Culture Index is a way to measure the culture of a congregation across ministries, and really it's something that is pretty translatable no matter where your geography, where you find yourself, and across demographics. So in our workshop today, we're going to be talking about the Innovation Lab's approach to innovation. We are going to talk about organizational culture and how that matters to innovative ideas and its relationship to innovative ideas. We're going to introduce 9 indicators of innovative potential, and we'll go through those pretty carefully. And then we're going to walk through a process of assessing and shifting your faith community's culture. And I do want to underscore that last bullet point there, that you are not alone. You are all here together as interim clergy, so you know you're not the only interim clergy out there. I work with congregations across the state of Minnesota, and this is the thing that is a huge part of my job. You are not the only congregation going through finding itself in a position where change is really, really needed. But the need for change doesn't make change any easier for a lot of us. And it is sometimes surprising how difficult even the simplest changes can be. And that's a factor of the culture of the congregation. So here is a tool that gets at what is the culture and how can we make it a culture that is more open to creativity and change than it maybe is already. So a first step in understanding this tool is understanding the Innovation Lab's approach to innovation. Sometimes we think about innovation as as sort of the brand new thing. Something's got to be really big and shiny and new. I've got shiny on the brain because we're going to watch that song from Moana tonight at our Wednesday evening Lenten movie and a dinner. So shiny is in my brain right now. And that's what we think about with innovation a lot, is that it's got to be some blingy, fantastic new thing, and cutting edge. But that is not how we talk about innovation or how we consider innovation through the Innovation Lab. It's more than an idea. Innovation is really about moving faithfully through a process that combines deep reflection on a church's mission, its reason for existing in its particular place, in its particular time, and the congregation's unique call. Why has God set this congregation where we are right now? It also looks at a community's assets. And I'm sure as interim pastors, this is something you are familiar with. This is a process you are familiar with, helping congregations discover assets that they maybe don't know that they have, and discover those assets and name them as strengths, that they are God-given gifts. And then also looking at the community's needs. And this is something that congregations across the country are just starting to talk about, where this need to go out into our community, our broader community, and look at what is happening in our community, which helps us very much understand our mission. It's really hard to have a clarity about mission if we don't know our community, the community in which we're set. What are the needs of the community, and what are the assets of the community? So innovation is about this process of understanding ourselves and our mission, understanding our assets, and understanding our community and the community's needs and assets. And theological innovation, that's maybe a term that isn't broadly used, but theological innovation has these 4 parts that are pretty significant. First of all, contextuality. So what's innovative in one context is not necessarily going to be innovative in another context, right? So a context that has done a ton of anti-racism work already, they've read the books, they've brought in the speakers, they've done an internal assessment, they're working on on anti-racism systematically in their setting. That congregation starting like reading Cast, that's not going to be an innovative thing. Starting a small group that's reading one book is not going to be innovative. But in a congregation that has done 0 anti-racism work, getting one small group to read one book together, that could be really innovative. So there's our different about context. So what's innovative in one place may not be innovative in another place. Spirit-led, obviously extremely important. We are the church because we are filled with the Holy Spirit. We are led by the Spirit. So what is the Holy Spirit calling out in us? What is our theological grounding? What's our understanding of Scripture? What is the essential theological place from where we start? And where do we then see the Spirit leading us into our community and defining us as a body? And how is the Spirit at work, both expanding our understanding of our mission and constraining how we innovate? So the Spirit is active in both of those roles, to open us up and to keep us in some healthy boundaries and definable parameters. And then transformative. The goal here is to develop ministry that meets people's needs. And to do that, we need to be engaging people's assets. We need to be leading towards transformed lives. So if innovation is to really take root, it has to be going somewhere that is transformational. There are congregations around me, this might sound familiar to many of you, who really, really, really just want young people in their congregation. That is a primary goal. Well, there are all sorts of blingy sort of ways to try to make that happen, and maybe some of those work, and we get young kids in our young families in our congregations. But if we aren't transforming ourselves who are already here and the young people who are suddenly coming to us, what's the point? And will there be any longevity to that kind of a ministry if it isn't in some way transformational? So transformative is important. And finally, that this is all a process, that there isn't just sort of one big event and then we're done being an innovative congregation, but there this tool and the steps that that are kind of placed within it help us develop a culture where innovation can be a constant part of our life together. It's a process that we undergo repeatedly. Which brings us to the idea that theological innovation is not a lightning bolt, one big, huge, great idea, and that's going to solve all sorts of problems, but really understanding this as a process. And so this quote from Dr. Vijay Kumar, the practice of innovation needs to be mastered by organizations attempting to harness its power. Innovation is a discipline. So thinking of innovation as a spiritual discipline. It is not magic. It is not something organizations can choose to practice, improve, and excel at. Kumar goes on to say, practitioners on the ground are most often the source of breakthrough ideas, but they need structures and processes to help them plan and define innovation. So innovation needs to be part of a whole culture. It's not one person's responsibility. It's not one person's gift. It's not one person's call. It's a part of the whole culture of the community, and it's a process. Unfortunately, I'm guessing this looks familiar to many of you, especially maybe as interim clergy. Trying to do something new in your ministry can often feel like Sisyphus pushing the proverbial giant boulder up the mountain. But this is true because of the culture of a congregation. So you're not just trying to push one idea through, you're trying to push the entire culture of a church along. If you think of even one small project that you've endeavored that has met resistance after resistance, you'll recognize that this is not just, it's not just that idea. It was changing people's minds. It was working through different systems. It was getting buy-in. It was all of these things. And that is where the boulder, that's where the boulder is. And unfortunately, talking about a culture shift seems like an even bigger lift than talking about one idea. So this is where the tool can be really helpful. So the Innovation Culture Index uses the metaphor of soil and tending the soil of a congregation or a community. And the culture, organizational culture, is the seedbed of innovation. So what's happening in the culture, in the soil, is essential to helping innovation take root and flourish and flower and bloom and fruit. And again, it's not just about a specific idea being better and therefore taking off. It's about this soil and what's going on in there. So we have 9 indicators, and these 9 indicators have been really, really well researched. They are what Innovation Lab found these particular indicators sort of everywhere in the literature of their research before they created this index, that in the fields of organizational culture, organizational change, and in innovation, these indicators consistently rose to the top as the most important indicators of whether an organization's culture hinders or fosters the ability to innovate. So we are going to look at these, and they measure a community's perception of their culture. So we're going to talk now about how it feels to people, these 9 indicators. So we're not trying to measure, it's not the same thing as measuring data. There aren't going to be specific numbers that you can kind of pull data about. We're measuring how people feel and their perception, which of course is what makes up the culture of a place. We can look at all sorts of demographics, and that will give us a lot of really good information, but it doesn't really define the culture. How people feel about the culture defines the culture. So our four main categories are mindset, structure, relationships, and habits. And as we move into these now, I'm going to ask you, as I start defining these, to plot for yourself where you think your current situation, your current congregation would land on this spectrum of 0 to 40, as we sort of define these. So I'm going to invite you to plot as we go along. So our first set is the mindset indicators. And these include, first of all, risk response. So what is the faith community's perspective on taking risks? So the two ends of this indicator are fearful and hopeful. And you can imagine where we hope congregations will be. But faith communities that innovate see failure as a necessary and positive step that can reveal the right direction to move ahead. And that is a tricky one for so many congregations. It's very ingrained in us to avoid failure, which of course means that we won't try new things until we're sure it's perfect. My brother is brilliant. He tests really high on the IQ scale, but he used to fail classes because he could not start writing a paper until he could see the whole paper in his brain and know that it was going to be all correct. And so he would just hand in blank sheets of paper. That does not work. That gets us nowhere. That got him some Fs, and he's a genius. So non sequitur, right? So if our risk response in a congregation is we really don't want to fail, we'll never take a risk. So can we move into a more hopeful state of being, and what would that look like? Because it is hopeful congregations that take risks and then learn from what doesn't work. They reframe failure as an opportunity to learn. And then the second indicator in this one is input. And it measures what is the faith community's orientation toward the world and ideas outside its wall. So are we the only ones who have all the right answers to all of our questions? Or are there things happening out in the world that will inform who we are and what we're doing? And so the two ends of this are closed and open with a gate, obviously. So sources of innovation can come from outside and unexpected places. And the most innovative faith communities are often open to very different voices and perspectives, many of whom are not within the building already. They are not considered members of the community. And then our third point there is existential vision. So what does the faith community believe about its reason for existing? And I find this one a really good one to talk about with congregations that want to talk about innovation. So why are you here is a first question to why do we need to change something? And so the two ends of this indicator are surviving and missioned. So a clear mission, a clear purpose leads to a culture where people take initiative and pursue their goals. If we all collectively know why God has put us here, taking a new step in a new direction is not that overwhelming because we know it fits within the mission of our congregation. We know that the rest of our community is basically with us because we're doing something that we've all agreed is why God calls us here. And it's easier to set aside fears and uncertainties when you can say, this fits within our mission. All right, new set of, oh, sorry, I'm gonna go back 1 second. So does anybody want to comment really quick on where something that you stuck out for you, something that you notice about where you positioned your congregation on one of these three? Any sort of aha moments? And don't forget to unmute. And I can't see everyone, I don't think, so I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think,
Good, please go.
for me, my churches have dwindled in size so much that I think one of the biggies is, and we've talked about it, but is the existential vision, mission. What is the mission now? When, it's still basically an elderly church congregation, and they've all been the chairs and leaders, for years, and they're exhausted, spent, and they want somebody else to do it. So there's not a lot of programming and not a lot of, and to sit them down and get them to, to see that even with whatever, 30 members or 35, the whole point is finding still that vision and why we exist and why we come together. And
Yeah.
so that's a biggie.
It is. It's a huge one. Yeah. And it can, and again, you are not alone. I could say that a million times. And it's so true. And so yes, so many of our congregations are aging and they are very tired, and it can be very hard to even consider that God still has a particular mission for us in our setting. But the joyful part of that is if we can do that thing, which itself might be an innovation, right? Revisioning why we're here. That might just be a nice little jump of energy, because now we've been redefined. We've thought of something together that is invigorating. So it is a hurdle, but the hurdle when met can really rejuvenate a congregation, because that lack of vision is so depleting.
Debilitating.
It's
Yeah,
debilitating.
paralyzing. Yeah, paralyzing. Yep. And the thing I run up against all the time is, let's how about food pantry, or how about coats and mittens during the winter, tree, or basket, or give those away. How about this? How about that? And we have a lot of churches in our small communities, and they just say, well, they're doing that next door. They're doing that down the street. Somebody else has already got that one. Well, why would we want to duplicate? Well, it's like, oh my goodness, do it anyway. I mean, what would you like to do? How about Wednesday night, feed the community? How about opening our, oh, well, only 8 people came last time. I don't know. Yeah, help me.
Yep. I hear you. Peter Park, yes.
So I may have missed it at the beginning, but when you think about the implementation of these surveys, is it something that you recommend in different stages of the key leaders or as a whole congregation? I know the church that I'm serving now, they've done this kind of readiness study probably about 2 pastors ago. Right. So I'm just kind of wondering how, in my mind, I'm trying to think, oh, this is a great tool, but how do I help implement this? Or maybe that's something you'll talk about later. So.
Yep. Thank you. Can you ask that question again at the end?
Okay.
Yes. So yes, it's a very good question. And
I'm trying to process in my mind how it would versus, okay, thanks.
Yep. Yep. And please do. And maybe we'll kind of answer that as we go. But I definitely want to come back to that. So thank you for raising that. Let's move into our second set of indicators, which are structure indicators. And this is where I think in the ELCA anyway, interim clergy do a lot of this work, looking at the structure of a congregation. So these will probably be very familiar to you. The first, again, plot your current setting on here, if you would. The first one is environment, and that is understood as the mood and atmosphere of this community when functioning together as a body. Jill, you were just talking about, we get together and we talk about ideas and everybody's sort of defeatist and there's just not good energy. So that is sort of telling us something about the environment of the congregation. So the two ends of this are serious and playful, and relaxed and playful environments obviously are going to build a better morale. They're going to be more encouraging of each other. They're going to think more creatively because there's sort of this openness and playfulness about possibilities and problem solving. So that's our environment. And the second indicator here is composition. So how is the faith community organized and regulated? And the two ends here are bureaucratic and adaptable. So this is the structure of making decisions. So a structure that feels adaptable fosters innovative progress. It empowers people to make decisions. It creates a much more nimble infrastructure to help implement ideas and changes. If we have to go through all sorts of committees and boards and planning teams to get a single simple idea into fruition, how much change is going to happen, right? It's just exhausting trying to get the idea out into the world, let alone actually execute it. So we've got these two environment and composition as our structure indicators. Does anything jump out to anyone here? Anything you notice on here that might be worth sharing with the group?
All right, I'll go again. Everybody's sleeping this afternoon.
It
Come
is
on, wake
just
up,
after
you
lunch.
guys. Where's our environment? What do we got going here? We got to get some good, mojo vibes going here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want in my church. How do you become an attractor for other people to want to come when your vibe is serious and bureaucratic? Your whole and everything you bring up, it's like, we've done it. So that's what comes up for me is, we want to attract new people. And that other stuff isn't very attractive. And I don't think they realize it.
Right. And that, I think, Jill, that's a great a segue into either one of the next two pieces. So we will come back to that. That's another great example of, it's so hard to see ourselves from the outside when we're so inside. And so we think we're great in whatever ways, because that's why we're still here. And so, but the vibe to the rest of the world might very well be, we are not a particularly playful bunch of people. And it can be a really hard sell for people above a certain age to think that playful is worthwhile, that there is meaning in playfulness, that they can be playful, that there's permission to be sort of carefree and lighthearted about church things. Somehow church is the serious place for some people. So I think that's another great example of how we are now. And my husband's a high school teacher, and he talks about the mindset, a static mindset or a elastic mindset. Somehow in education, if I can't learn anything new, and I just tell myself that, and so I'm stuck. And our congregations can have that same sort of static mindset that this is how we are. But not so. And we're going to come back to that. Mr. Parker, I think, was asking how that's going to, this is a tool to help with that. So our third set of indicators out of 4 is relationship indicators. And the two here, again, I'm going to invite you to plot where your congregation is now. Connectivity. I love this little island metaphor here on both ends of the spectrum. So do the parts and people throughout the faith community share, communicate, and interact intentionally? Intentionally, that's a big word. And so the two ends of this indicator are isolated and interwoven. Innovation can rarely be done all by oneself, right? I'm doing pulpit supply up in my little church up north, and I can't make that congregation just do new things. I'm pulpit supply. I am not woven into the fabric of the congregation in a way that would say, yes, okay, now we're going to go in this direction. So the best innovators share and collaborate with others across departments and ministries. And that idea of collaboration is huge. It's huge. So many great ideas, and then the implementation of it. We all know this from working on different teams, planning events, or different teams doing a thing. I was a costume designer for 6 years in a high school, and I had lots of kids who had no idea what they were doing, none whatsoever. And they would get together and teach each other how to run a sewing machine. They would teach each other how to do this, how to do their drawings. They would teach each other how to sew. And suddenly we were costuming huge shows because they were collaborating, and they brought their shared knowledge and their shared creativity. And it was way more powerful than any one of us could do together. And then bonds is our second in this category. Is there a widespread feeling of trust and support among people within the faith community? So the two ends of this indicator are suspicious and trusting. Faith communities with high levels of trust between people collaborate more. They take better risks, and they demonstrate greater stability. So a congregation that is suspicious is not going to get a lot done, because there's, again, that fear of trying something new. I don't know if anybody's got my back. I don't know if people are going to start talking about me because this thing I tried failed. So trust is a huge, huge thing in innovation. Anything jump out to anybody? Thank you, Peter. Oh, Mr. Park. There we go. Sorry.
You can call me Peter.
Okay.
I don't want this to be the Peter Park and Jill show, but the question I had regarding the relationship, in some ways, these are very positive things. In some ways, I think the church I'm serving now is very much more enmeshed, where everybody gets a vote, everybody talks about everything, and and so in a sense, connectivity is great, but at the same time, it's also very bureaucratic, because there's a lot of sense of, okay, I have to talk to 10 different people for a small congregation. How does that help me process a little bit about whether that's part of it or not? And
it is definitely part of it. And I think we actually come up to that in our next set of indicators. So another segue, thank you. That is definitely a part of it, because there can be that sense of interwoven, can be definitely, as you said, it's a gift. It's a very healthy thing. It's a wonderful part of a healthy community. At the same time, a lot of us in the areas of innovation tend to talk the innovation to death. So we have to talk it over with so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and we have to get all that input. And until we've done that, we can't do a thing. And that is just a barrier to trying something. So it can be a bit of a tricky balance, but you're very correct in saying, gift and maybe a barrier. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that we are about to talk about that right here. Yes. So thank you, Peter, for segueing us right into implementation. Again, go ahead and plot your congregation on the scales here. Does the faith community tend to implement new ideas, or endlessly spend time discussing and debating without ever acting? So exactly what you're talking about, Peter. So the two ends of this indicator are delaying and enacting. So that's maybe, Peter and anyone else with that question, that's kind of a way of measuring that. So are we using our bureaucracy and our interwovenness as a delay tactic? And that keeps us from ever doing the new thing, which, subconsciously might be really scary for us. We want to do it. We know we should do it, but we're a little terrified of it. So we'll just keep talking about it. And so the best feedback comes from real world implementation. Try it, see how it goes. And faith communities who can quickly enact tests of their ideas. And that's another big piece that Innovation Lab talks about. Is there a way to break the idea down into pieces so that we don't have to talk about every part of it and have it all be perfect, but can we try a piece of it, whatever the new thing is? And then learn from that and then try the new piece plus another new piece or revamp the whole thing. So I hope I'm a little bit getting at what you were talking about, Peter, that implementation question. And then experimentation. So what's the faith community's tendency when it finds something that works? Does it rest? And this is a little bit what you were talking about, Jill, like we've done that before. We know how that's going to go. And we did that before like 30 years ago. Okay, wait a second. It might be actually a new experiment because the world is a different place if we try that thing now. Or we're different now. We're different people than we were 30 years ago. Our community is different now. So we try a thing, and then do we just kind of let it sit there, or do we continue learning and looking for new ways to improve? And again, not looking for perfection, because perfection is antithetical to trying new things, but always open to learning and exploring and seeing where God is leading us now. So the two ends of this indicator are reactive and proactive, and I think those are really important words. So innovation is a continuous, ongoing thing, and when we understand that, it eliminates, or it helps people be a little bit more at ease about their reactive responses. So we've all done the thing in worship that one or two people just don't like because it's something different than what they're used to. And then you get the passive or passive aggressive response, like the president tells you that somebody else who will remain anonymous, they don't like it. Well, that's a reactive response to innovation that's really not helpful, right? A proactive response is we're gonna try this new thing. Everybody's going to have a chance for input. Some of us are not going to like it, but some of those people are not going to like anything. And we're going to listen to that feedback, and then we're going to learn about what works and what doesn't work. We're going to build on the great things, and we're going to learn from the not so great things. So that's your reactive and proactive. Really quick, any thoughts about those two? And then we're going to break into a little discussion amongst ourselves. I'm running out of time so fast.
I think my church is pretty high on the experimentation, but implementation is low because of the volunteer burnout. And now we're fine talking about things in committee meetings, and then it's like, oh, we should ask them to do it. And then we ask them, and they say, no, we ask them to do it. And it just keeps cycling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that burnout is a real thing, for sure, for sure. And that can go back to, not necessarily, I mean, people are just legitimately burned out. It can also go back to that idea of mission. And so a lot of us get our energy from knowing that the thing we're doing is what God is calling us to do. And so how invested in our mission are we? And if we're not really invested in our mission, is that our mission? Right? If we've lost all energy for things, are we living into the mission that God has for us? I think that's an important question to ask. Are we doing it because we're supposed to? That's different than God is calling us to do this thing. Can you kind of hear the differentiation there? And so that burnout is a real thing. And delaying is definitely a way to avoid further burnout or elongated tiredness, prolonged tiredness. Really quick
question. I could see this process being used for a large decision or discernment. Do you also recommend that going through this process for small things? Like you mentioned worship and how people respond to something new in worship or something. Would you see this going through this process for smaller things as well?
Yeah, in fact, it's kind of built for both, but really it's built for smaller projects. So the idea, it was originally built to say, and the bias here is that there's a giant congregation with a huge staff, and how do you introduce one new ministry as like the youth director when you're not the person absolutely in charge? So it's sort of built for implementing one new thing in your congregation. And the idea is that when you've tried it, when you've worked through the process with that one new thing, first of all, it helps that one new thing be as creative and meeting as many needs as it can, and sort of it helps you through the process of that to really make that one new thing as positive and impactful as it can be. And it gives you a process so that the next new thing, you use that same process, and that's how you start shifting a culture. So that with each new thing, now you've learned the process. And so with each new thing, you're going through the same process. And for me, it feels tedious because I just want to do the new thing. I'm a creative person. I have ideas and I want to just do them. But as the leader of a congregation, I need to bring the congregation along. And so for me, doing the tedious work is actually the better thing, the healthier thing for my congregation. And that's, I think, where as especially as interim, it seems like a great tool, because you can be introducing the one new thing while you are in your congregation as an interim. And now you've given them a process that is repeatable for any new thing, and hopefully will be repeated with each new thing down the road. Technically, we were supposed to go into these partner discussions 10 minutes ago. So I'm very aware of our time. But can we just, in lieu of those, sorry, Deb, you set them up and now I'm going to not use them. In lieu of those conversations, can we just kind of look at the questions on the board and go ahead and take like 5 minutes to contemplate together from your own perspective, which indicator is strongest within your own faith community's culture and which indicator is most in need of improvement. And I'll go back through the slides again. And we'll start with that question. And that's a reason to do it together, actually, because then you can see the sides. So we've got our first three. Which of these is the strongest? Which of these is the weakest out of all 9? Actually, let's just go to this one.
Emily, do you want people just to put their answers in the chat so we can
let's do
get
that
from everybody?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you. Oh, collaboration. See, better ideas come out. So if you would go ahead and put in the chat which one you think is the strongest place, the strongest indicator for your congregation, and which is the one that is in need of the most improvement.
We have strongest is connectivity, weakest composition, strongest mindset, connectivity as strongest, existential vision as weakest, relationship strongest, structure weakest, input strongest, relationship strongest, risk response.
Ooh, good for them.
Weakest or implementation. A strongest is risk response. Another strongest connectivity, weakest composition. Connectivity is strongest, weakest is experimentation. Input is the strongest and connectivity is the weakest. Weakest composition, strongest implementation, weakest implementation.
I love that. So we're all over the place. And here's the thing. This is why it's so contextual, right? Because certain congregations are, I mean, we did hear a lot of people saying that relationships, or specifically connectivity, are their strongest. And I think for many congregations, that's where they would land. That's been my experience so far, that the people who are still there really do feel connected to each other. That's why they're there. That is a huge value of a congregation. At the same time, one of the congregations I worked in, there were certain people who scored connectivity as their weakest thing because they're the ones who really want to be connected. But there are systems in place in the church where they are feeling like the ones left out. They want that community, but they're not the ones who meet for coffee at 9 a.m. on Tuesdays, which is where all the decisions are made. So they're feeling like, you know, I have a job and therefore I can't really connect with people. So I think hearing this from each other, hopefully we're seeing that we're not alone in that. A lot of us experience this sense of connectivity, and a lot of us has really different needs and gaps in the culture and structures of our congregations. So thank you for sharing that, everyone. I appreciate that. A second question that we might consider really quickly, where do you see evidence of the culture impacting innovation positively? And can you give an example of that? And where do you see evidence of the culture hindering innovation? And can you give an example of that? And maybe let's encourage, if there are a couple of folks who haven't spoken yet, could you maybe share a story of one or the other of those examples? A place where the culture has impacted innovation positively, or a place in which the culture has hindered innovation?
I can go. I am finishing seminary, so I don't have a congregation, but I do pulpit supply at a church once a month. It's a very small congregation, maybe 10 members. Yes, and it should have been closed down or merged with another congregation, but you know, these members have been there since they were children. The pews used to be full. They're like, we're taking this church to our grave, is like something that they literally say. And so I, you know, as a seminary student, I feel energized by innovation and trying different things. And it has been a big learning experience for me working with them, because they only like to sing 10 hymns from their hymn book, and they only, you know, they do things and I work at another church too, and I do pulpit supply regularly from them, and it is much more open to experimentation and innovation, and so I think like maybe the second time I preached there, before I really knew what was going on, it was the parable of, I forget what people call it, but the when the enslaved person buried their treasure.
Yes.
And they, on a sign outside, it said, you know, welcome Hannah Richards, you know, don't bury your treasure. And my whole sermon was about how, like, basically reimagining the text, that like the person who buried their treasure, it was like an act of resistance. And it was really fun for me to write and make this argument, but I had no idea that, you know, it was like on the front of the bulletin. It was, you know, that's just one example, but they it has been hard for them to even imagine any sort of change or the way they do anything, because they're very protective, I guess.
Yeah.
Of everything.
And they have a vision of what the church should be, and where they see it going, and that does not include innovation. Yeah. Yep. And I have to say, just from personal experience, the openness to doing things differently in worship is sort of an indicator of the culture of the congregation around it. It's not always telling, but it can be definitely. And of course, worship helps shape us as community. So innovation in worship is definitely a way of shaping a culture that is more open to innovation. Any just one other story really quick, and then we'll glide through the next couple of slides and get into Q&A.
I think something that's hindering us is that there's 2 other Presbyterian churches literally in the same town. And it was like this historical division of labor that was done. And now it's seen as, oh, we can't do college ministry because that's what the other church does. And kind of needing to renegotiate who are we in community as Presbyterians together.
Thank you, Rachel. That is again one of those pieces that I think is happening all over the place in all sorts of denominations, and because of denominationalism, where we're the Lutherans and Lutherans identify this way, and the Presbyterians are over there and they do things their way, and the UCCs are over there and they do things we're all here and we're all kind of floundering a little bit, but God forbid we should work together on something. Even though, like, theologically, we're really not that far apart. And we are all, somebody else was saying, we've got the coats and caps for kids. What if all three churches did that together some year? So that is a common struggle interdenominationally, and as you're experiencing just within, I served a church where we were the ELCA here, and literally 2 blocks away in a tiny town was the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church. And we did nothing together, although theologically we're further apart than the ELCA and the UCC and the Presbyterians. So it's a tricky thing that we've created these clear identities, and now ecumenism is almost essential for our survival, and other partners that are not church people. So just working with the grocery store or the Chamber of Commerce, but we're church, so we do, they're not doing church things, but they probably are in some way. So finding those community partners, other congregations and non-religious organizations can be a huge innovation for congregations to redefine those relationships and start partnering with people. So thank you for sharing that. So here is how this assessment works, and I hope, Peter, that this gets back to your question now from way a long time ago. So the ICI helps a congregation self-assess the culture of your church and the impact of that culture on enacting change, taking risks, etc. It offers a way for congregations to talk openly about cultural strengths and areas that need to shift. So what's working here and what is not working here? And it gives a vocabulary for talking about those things. It gives a congregation the opportunity to discern tangible actions for overcoming obstacles to innovation. And that's, again, where, and I'm sorry, I don't know the person who asked this question earlier, but is this for one small thing, or for are we taking off a giant thing at once, or one small thing? This is saying discern very tangible, specific actions that you can take to start shifting culture, and then lay the groundwork for experimenting in ministry with greater success, one experiment at a time. Here's how it works. There's an online questionnaire that's about 45 questions. Well, it's exactly 45 questions. It takes 10 to 15 minutes to complete for most people. In certain congregations I've worked with, there needs to be some assistance with technology, and we can make adaptations for that. The second step is we come in with your scores, and that's always facilitated. It might be me, but it's the innovation lab, so it could be anyone. But we will come in with you and talk about what your scores are and help break them down with a leadership team that you put together in your congregation. And that leadership team, we want to have as broad a demographic as possible, so as much representation of the congregation as possible. And so we'll break down what the ICI scores look like and what they could mean for your congregation. And then we'll be with you then to help you strategize what your next steps are. And if you want, we can follow that up with another consultation session where we come in with this tool called the Common Culture Interventions Guide, where we can look at specific interventions for specific obstacles to innovation that are theologically grounded and mission oriented, so that they can, again, if there's a specific innovation you're looking at, we can start moving that boulder up the hill a little bit with you. So that is a really quick overview. And the idea here is that we are working with you to tend the soil in your congregation. And then once that soil is tended, hopefully the congregation can keep that ball, I'm mixing the metaphors, keep that boulder rolling up the hill keep those innovations flourishing and plant new innovations as well that will take root, because the process can be repeated over and over and over once it's learned. Okay, so there's a QR code to learn more about Innovation Lab and the Innovation Culture Index. You can also just go straight to Megan is the woman at Innovation Lab who runs the whole thing. Or you can go to the cymt.org/innovate website and learn more there. And we have 6 minutes, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And if you're in Minnesota, you can contact Emily and I can get you her contact information.
Mm-hmm. The cost of the ICI is based on congregation. I want to say that right, is based on congregation size. So it is accessible. They really want it to be as accessible as possible for congregations. And I think for the average, like for a small congregation, it's about $100, I think. So it is not a particularly expensive tool. And to get back at how it's different from other assessments, the idea here is that it comes with action steps involved. So there's immediate feedback. A lot of congregations I've worked with, they sort of take an assessment tool and then it just sort of sits there. So now we know our demographics. Well, what are we supposed to do with that? We know we know that this is what people think we should be doing, but what do we do with that? The idea here is that we are working with you to help shift the culture of a congregation, to make it a little bit more open to innovation and change, and then get them going. And did I just see Barb has her hands up?
Barbara.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Can we get these slides, or is it all
No.
on your website?
The slides are actually the intellectual property of Innovation Lab, so I'm not able to share them. But you can go to their website, and you can certainly contact me or Deb, and we can help share information. But the slides themselves are owned by the Innovation Lab, so I can't share those, I'm afraid.
And we've also recorded it, and I'm creating a place where all of these videos will be posted, so you could go back and refer to it.
I'm going to stop share for 1 second because I see a question in the chat about the cost, and I have a slide in another place that I can actually just bring that up and you can see it.
Emily, how would you say that your Innovation Labs process of this might be a little bit different from some of the other things that are out there? And
well, depending upon what we are
right, and comparing against
it to,
Right.
let me just get this cost up there and then people can see it. So here is, here's a cost breakdown for, there we go, for congregations of different sizes. So hopefully folks can see that. For one thing, with this slide up here, there are different tiers. So you get a different level of, depending upon what you want to do, it can be facilitated in different ways. And so one of the big things is we come in with the results and help you break them down. And we come in with a process that helps congregations move from where they are to a more open culture around change and innovation. Another piece of this is that we are not assessing hard data. We're not asking you to dig for hard data. We're not asking you to do a huge survey of your broader community, at least not at this stage, though that can be very helpful. We are just asking your congregation how they feel. What is their perception? How do they see things? So there aren't any, people don't need to know data. They just need to know their own feelings. And I think that that's another, I've seen this now in facilitating feedback sessions, the results sessions. I've seen this tool give some of those folks who are feeling like they're the outliers, that they're on the margins of a congregation, and some folks with some really pent up, challenging feelings. Being in the conversation gives them permission to share those critiques of the congregation. And I think that's one of the great assets of this tool is we're creating an environment where that's okay, where people are safe to be vulnerable about things that might not be rosy in the congregation. And we're doing it in such a place that that can be received as a constructive criticism rather than just a negative. And it can be part of the conversation about how do we open up as a congregation rather than just a judgmental, sort of crabby vent of bad feelings. It can be a really positive thing, and it gives people language for those sort of constructive criticisms. So we've all taken the same survey questionnaire, and we've all seen the same prompts. We've got the different indicators, and those indicators themselves give us some language around, questioning in the council or in the planning team of whatever, in the committee. Are we being open to input from outside, or are we just listening to ourselves in an echo chamber right here? And so it gives people language to start asking questions that can help shift mindsets and systems.
Mhm.
Well, Emily, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This is the day when we are really looking at how do we lead in times of change. And I think that this is a tool that could have potential and give some data that's been put together. I'm talking the perceptions of those who take it as a place to start a good conversation. So thank you so much for being with us. And I'm going to stop recording and